Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Axiom Insights podcast. I'm Sara Morgan, Axiom's Chief Revenue Officer and your host for today's show. I'm joined today by Rob Keller, Senior Director of Legal and Associate General Counsel for Cisco. Rob leads a 30-person team in Cisco's product legal department that supports more than $24 billion of Cisco's annual revenue. His team's goal is to drive optimal business outcomes by navigating complex regulatory landscapes and helping his team's business clients sustain a smart level of risk. Rob has over 20 years of experience in all areas of technology law, including intellectual property, privacy, AI and data use, corporate law, contract negotiation, and more. Rob, welcome to Axiom Insights and for making the time to join us today.
Yes, thank you, Sara. And you should probably do my intro more often. You do a better job than I do.
Well, look, before we get started, just a quick note. The opinions Rob shares today are his own and don't necessarily reflect the views of Cisco or any affiliated organization. It's a standard disclosure, but an important one. So with that done, let's dig in. Rob, great to have you here. You know, you're in charge of the legal work related to literally thousands of products over at Cisco, both new and historic products that you've got that still are in action. And it's one of the largest technology companies in the world in a time of rapid change in technology and related regulation. Big question, but what's on your mind right now?
Yeah, that's well said, well summarized. The big thing really is just the pace of change that we're seeing right now. If you look back at Cisco and the history of it, and you did a really good job summarizing what my team supports. I mean, we support products that have been around for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And then we also have stuff that is absolutely brand new. And there's been this big shift of in the tech sector, really focusing on on-prem software, hardware, those types of things towards moving to the cloud. And now we're starting to see a lot of things that we didn't necessarily expect with that. Basically things that having to do with data sovereignty and of course, AI being built into everything right now. And all this is happening at an accelerated pace. And
Yeah.
that's really what's keeping me busy more than anything, is staying on top of all those accelerated changes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, One thing that was interesting to me is the Cisco's development, Rob, because maybe you could share a little bit about Cisco because and where you are right now. Because when I think of Cisco, I think of WebEx, right? And you do so much more than that, and you've rapidly responded to the profound shift in business driven by AI. So maybe you could just give us a quick kind of summary of the type of things that Cisco is now doing.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. WebEx is what a lot of people know because it's what you see. It's a user interface, but we're not a company that's really consumer focused. So people will see WebEx because they see the name WebEx out there, but that's a really small bit of our business. That's less than 10%. We are historically really more of a networking company and a security company. So if you think about everything behind the scenes making this production we're doing right now possible, a lot of that stuff's powered by Cisco. We do all the networking. So you think about switching, routing, even things like wireless, and then you think about all the security that's being built into those types of products, and how we make sure that these things are safe from hackers, how we make sure that our data is not being stolen, how we make sure that everything stays reliable. Those are all the things that Cisco actually does, that they've been doing for years.
Yeah. Um, when we were talking ahead of this podcast, we were talking a lot about data governance, and that's become so critical. And you shared that you felt that data governance had almost become more critical than AI itself, which seems contrarian, I suppose, to a lot of the conversations that are happening right now. Can you unpack that for us?
Yes, happy to. Let me put a few qualifiers in there. Uh, AI is without a doubt a massive game changer. We're as a result of it, we're gonna see a whole lot more productivity. We're gonna see lots of great new things being developed as a result of it. Great drug development, technology development, um, and there's also a whole lot of risk that comes with it. So I don't want to play down AI.
Yeah.
It's definitely significant. But you got to think about AI and the relationship to data, and also the amount of attention that's getting right now. Part of the reason that AI is getting so much attention right now is because it's big in popular culture. Like everybody, even if you're not in technology, you understand it. You see it being used all the time. Um, but AI has been around for years. We had machine learning, large language models. What's different now is we now have LLMs combined with um, basically an easy user interface. So, and that's really what when we think of generative AI, which is what most people think when they're thinking of AI, that's what they're focused on. So everybody can see it, they can understand it, but and if you attend, if you're interested in law around AI, there's a million things, million presenters right now that are talking about it.
Yeah.
However, AI is nothing without the data. I mean, you think about what AI is, it's a data aggregator. It's just taking massive amounts of data. So you can't even talk about AI without talking about data. And people are not paying as much attention to that right now, I think. And that's why I think that data is arguably more important from a legal standpoint than AI.
It's so true, isn't it? Because we think of language and we don't always think language is data, right? But that's essentially what we're talking about. And I suppose 5 years ago, we talked a lot about PII, so your personal information, right? And somehow that, in my mind, is different to language. But
Yeah.
but even this kind of idea that identifiable data, it's just got tremendous value and compliance implications, I suppose. So,
Yeah.
what does that mean for you in your in-house role, and how do you think that's impacting the regulatory landscape?
Yeah. No, that's a really, really astute observation. Um, a few years ago, and it was mostly led in primarily in the EU, but we're seeing it all over the world now. There was a realization that there is value in data, not just PII, but
Mhm.
in the actual data that companies have, that individuals have, and it's a commodity and it's worth something. And for a long time, you had companies that were just gobbling it up. You could go into Starbucks, for example, and get on their free Wi-Fi.
Right.
Free use of internet, great, but it wasn't free because the provider was sucking up all that data and using it to improve all of their models and improve their
Mm.
products. And there's a realization that that's out there, and so governments and individuals are responding to it now. In the EU, you've got all kinds of regulations that are rolling out, like the EU Data Act.
Right.
They had GDPR, but now they've got the EU Data Act and the Cyber Resilience Act, which is a reflection on the significance of protecting data. And they also have the EU AI Act, which is frankly kind of an extension of the EU Data Act.
Yeah. And how do you prioritize all that? Because you had, as you say, Data Act, AI Act, DORA, Cyber Resiliency Act, and there's probably another one coming that I don't know about, but how are you prioritizing all that as a leader in a legal team?
Um, for a lot of that, honestly, you prioritize it based on when, if we're talking about these regulations, you prioritize it based on when they're rolling out the regulations, when they're adopting them country by country, and when they're going to start enforcing them. And there's no better way to prioritize it. I will say though, with one caveat, and that is that certain things that require a long lead time to make sure that your products are compliant, those you might need to prioritize because you've got to build that into the product development process.
Right. And in terms of enforcement timings for those different, what have you seen? What have you seen for those different acts? Like, how has it played out?
Uh, when you say in terms of enforcement of those acts,
Yeah, less the enforcement of infringing those acts, but the time that from when they come in to when they actually need to be applied, what is the kind of general period?
yes. Again, it kind of depends on what the act is and what its implications are. Um, Talking about the Cyber Resilience Act. So this Cyber Resilience Act is basically this requirement that we harden our technologies. We make sure that they're protected against cyber threats. Uh, that um, that one I feel like has a pretty reasonably long lead time
Right.
because it's also impacting things like hardware. So timeline for that one, by the way, full compliance is December of 2020. December of 2027.
Mhm.
So we still have a fair amount of time, but that's because of the massive lead times that you need. So with all of these, for the most part, you have time to get compliant, provided that you start acting pretty quickly based on when they roll them out. What I have seen so far, and again, focusing mostly on the EU because they tend to be at the forefront of all of this, is they'll roll out these, uh, they'll roll out an act, for example, and then they'll solicit feedback from
Yeah.
tech companies or interested parties uh, to sort of shape how they're going to interpret these laws. And then the laws are adopted by the member states. So you do have a fair amount of lead time as long as you're paying attention.
And Rob, how do you think about that? Because um, you know, you're probably in a position where you see these a lot, right? So the need to kind of, okay, new act, new thing, totally kind of unique area coming from the EU. You understand the 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 way in which that happens, member states, etc. But then, and you're probably kind of well versed in, okay, no worries, I know what I need to do to kind of implement this within Cisco. That there might be, clients that are listening to this that are not in
Yeah.
that situation. They're thinking, well, actually, this is the first time I've dealt with that. How would you recommend they go through that, implementing that change, making sure that the company is compliant, that one assumes you have to go through all your documents and repaper things if needed. Like, how does that work, and how do you go about planning that
For
in
it,
advance?
yes. I mean, we are fortunate at Cisco. Our legal department is over 500
Right.
professionals, and we have experts who their entire role is government compliance. We also have a whole nother branch of government affairs folks that can help shape these laws. So we do have those advantages. I think if you're a leaner legal department from a smaller company, I don't see I don't see how you do it without leaning on some outside experts for guidance,
Yeah.
and then scaling up. Frankly, you and I talked about how companies can leverage uh, places like Axiom when we were talking beforehand. This is probably one of those places because you might need to leverage outside firms to give you some of that guidance if you're a small, lean legal department. But then you've got to do some quick scale up on your documents to make sure that they're compliant, on guidance to your product development teams, and that might be where you want to scale up with companies like Axiom.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think it's a real combination where people are then saying, okay, well, I'll go to my law firm for the very kind of, pointy edge of the, what does that act actually say? How should I think about it? And then kind of coming to Axiom for this situation where, okay, I now need to review and update contracts. I need to make sure that the clauses comply with the relevant act. I've got to, look at my data protection audit rights, or whatever the relevant clause is. And then obviously documenting that, record keeping, making sure that policies and procedures are up to date. And that, you're right, that kind of is one of the ways that I think people are getting it done.
Yeah, a
Um,
lot of the stuff becoming compliant with some of these big regulations, it's really lumpy in terms of the amount of work. So that is one of those times where you need to temporarily scale up.
yeah, that makes sense. One, I assume you see, and I don't say this because we're no longer in the EU, but I don't say this because I'm British, but um, is the EU the gold standard, and then do you build everything you're doing internally around that gold standard, or how do you think about it?
Yes. I see the EU as the gold standard because they're always thinking about all of these issues. They're always at the forefront. I mean, um, the head of our, we have a team that leads on AI governance and
Uh-huh.
uh, and privacy law, and they actually did a study a couple of years ago, and it showed that there were literally over 100 countries in the world that had put together privacy and data regulations. And, in the US, we seem to be kind of doing it on a state by state basis. So we tend to look
Right.
to California and what they're rolling out. But the EU is always seems to be at the forefront of this. And some of that in some ways might be to their own detriment because they're seen as being overregulated. And but basically, if you can if you can ensure that you're compliant with what they're rolling out, you know you're going to be good everywhere else. And I'm probably overgeneralizing when I say that, but that's sort of that's the general
Yeah.
self-guidance.
But Rob, maybe to pick up on that a little bit more. So you obviously are launching products globally, right? So all countries have different requirements. And in some cases, one assumes those requirements are ever evolving. Um, but yet, as you say, you may and we may kind of view that the EU guidance is more strict and stringent and stops kind of innovation and growth. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that multi-jurisdictional compliance without creating a bottleneck for the business?
Yes, that's in this is Rob's opinion. Uh, but I actually think that that is a key element where product legal, where my team gets involved, because
Yeah.
uh, you know, a really good lawyer that's an expert in an area, they're going to be hyper focused on that area. So they're going to want to make sure that you've got everything buttoned up and that you're compliant.
Mm.
Uh, so I often feel like what my team is doing is they're working closely with those regulatory attorneys, hand in hand, and trying to ensure that you're not slowing down innovation, but you're working early on with the product development team to
Yeah.
ensure they're going to be compliant as you're doing the development of the product, not trying to figure out on the back end right before the product launches and then slowing down the launch.
And when you say early on, like how early?
uh, Years?
Rob, we're talking about the multi-jurisdictional requirements here, and obviously there is news about Iran and the change that's happening there in the Middle East. Did that impact things for you? Have you seen things,
Absolutely.
crop up?
Yes, yes, without a doubt. One of the big things that we've seen in terms of a push over the years is a move more towards to the cloud, right? Uh, More and more features are being pushed to the cloud. Uh, but then you have to think about, what is the cloud? The cloud is
Mm.
nothing more than basically something being hosted somewhere on a data center. And with everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, there is definitely this concern about stability in the region. And so suddenly we're maybe rethinking our strategies of, what does data sovereignty look like? Where are we putting data centers, and what is a smart place to be putting them? And there's also been historically, there was a big push towards moving things to the cloud, not being as concerned about where your data was housed. But over the past few years, particularly given the geopolitics between the US, the EU, and now the Middle East, people are starting to think more about, I want my data to be in a place that's stable, but I don't necessarily trust the country where it's going if it's going somewhere else.
Ah, fascinating. And so tell me more, like what does that mean to your daily, legal advice you're giving, the products that are being produced? Because if you're just tying a few things together, if you're kind of so early on in the product development, you talk about years before the thing actually comes to ship and launch. These kind of changes are you didn't know it's going to happen 2 years ago. So how do you make sure that you weave that in a way that doesn't stop development and shipping of products and so on?
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could always predict
Yeah.
the future? Yeah, basically the best you can do is you can learn from these experiences and try to make sure that you don't get caught the next time around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose keep a real kind of pulse on what's happening outside and in the just the macro environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, how when things are uncertain, how what's your advice to those that are listening around how in-house teams can provide legal advice that's both protective and pragmatic? And what's your preferred framework for calculated risk taking?
Um, this is, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to go in-house. I love being in-house because you're not just thinking about it from a risk averse standpoint. I mean, if we want to be completely risk averse, we just don't do any business, right? If you don't produce anything, then you don't have any risk. My preferred approach is to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to make sure that the business is up and running, that it's providing customers the service that they want. So that's the way I always approach everything, is that business first mindset. But then the second thing is looking at the situations, making good decisions and being transparent about it with your customers. One of the advantages that Cisco has as a company is that our customers trust us because we are transparent. Like, think about, for example, data use and AI collection. We follow policy of being transparent about how we use their data, what we're doing with their data, and giving them choice to opt out of us using their data, depending on what the product is. Like, that doesn't work in an entire universe, but always being transparent.
Yeah, and I listened to a really fantastic podcast from your CPO, G2 Patel, and innovation. Yeah, what a great guy. It was just such a great podcast. But um, clearly innovation and frankly hard work is at the core of everything that you do at Cisco. Um, and we've talked a lot about how do I manage that risk. But can I just flip that around, Rob? Like, does your team do anything that enables and accelerates the business? Obviously you've got to kind of manage that risk, but talk a little bit about how you're involved with the product teams or whichever team it is within Cisco to really kind of accelerate what's going on in the business.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Uh, the the best way that we get involved is by getting involved early. Again, sitting in the room with the team when they're at business commit, concept commit, when you're thinking about what products we want to release and where we want to go with it, so that we can start thinking about how to build in risk mitigation early on. That's probably the biggest place where we can help accelerate innovation. Because what you really don't want is, you don't want to get to the 11th hour with a product release and suddenly realize that you're not compliant in a bunch of areas, and then you have to put everything on hold, or you roll it out, and then you have all kinds of regulators coming after you, and then you have to pull the product back. So that's
And how have you got there though, Rob? Because one assumes that isn't something that maybe in kind of bigger companies, but one assumes it's a process that Cisco has built over years, and they've got to a point where they know, okay, bring legal in early. You've kind of built an amazing relationship where they come to you early. But for those kind of listeners that maybe are not at Cisco, right, and don't have the kind of 500 odd lawyers and all the kind of support that comes with that, what's your advice? Like, what's your practical, tactical advice about making sure that legal is in early, that legal is part of that design and solutioning in those first meetings?
That's a great question. And actually, some of the companies, so Cisco's a big company, so we acquired a lot of small companies. I've seen some of the small companies do a fantastic job at this. So it doesn't necessarily depend on the size of the legal department. But being in the room, like, I love being in my on the business side, the executive weekly meetings, just hearing what's going on. But it's it's a relationship that goes both ways. If I was in those meetings and I was constantly telling them what they can't do, because oh, you can't, don't even consider that product because you're going to run into X, Y, and Z issues, then they wouldn't invite me into the meetings. So you need to be in the room, you need to be listening to media, actively thinking about, okay, this is what they want to build. How can we make sure that this is going to not get us into hot water? And how is this going to really still do what they want it to do? So, so having that business mindset is key.
And you've mentioned that a few times, and I think it's a big part of one of the reasons that, I've been at Axiom now for 16, 17 years and was a litigator before that. But one of the things that I think we've always really worked hard on is finding lawyers who have got a business mindset, the business of law. How do you define that? Like, what do you think that is in someone?
The business,
And maybe give me some examples of how it operates for you.
the business of law. This is something I used to think about early in my career, because it's sort of like, what does a lawyer do?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it is contract negotiation, and I mean, in your case, early on, it was litigation.
Yeah.
The business of law to me is really nothing more than how do you keep bad things from happening that you can't see today. That is the business of law, whether it's, again, those contracts to make sure that you're getting the rights that you need from your suppliers, or you're not going to go out of business because you have to indemnify your customers on something that you didn't see coming, or whether it's making sure that you have the right intellectual property, or whether it's complying with all these regulations. That's all it is avoiding that risk. In an ideal world, like, you don't even know the lawyer's there because they've kept all the risk away. So
I love that idea. You don't even know the lawyer's there because that's so great. I mean, it's a great kind of segue here because one of the topics that comes up a lot when I'm speaking to clients, particularly as it relates to AI for their own teams, and then also for any service providers they're using, is data governance. What should I look for? What do I require in my AI providers? What does good due diligence look like? Can you give me a sense of how you're thinking about that for your own team?
specifically as it relates to the AI.
Yes, exactly. So things like, my law firm might be using AI now, but do I have control over it? Do I know when they're using it? I now want to invest in maybe a contract management system or, a platform that uses AI to get my work done, but I don't quite know how I should set up my teams or what indeed I should look for, right, in these various providers for AI. So, Rob, one topic that our clients ask about as it relates to AI for their own teams now, for their own legal teams, is really twofold. One is I've got various service providers that some of whom want to use AI, some of whom say they're not using AI, but then when I get the advice back, I'm thinking, oh, they probably have used AI. And then, of course, in some cases, looking at bringing AI into their legal teams and just unsure about what they should be looking for in these AI providers. What does good due diligence look like? What terms should they have in the engagement letters or the MSAs? How are you thinking about that internally in your team?
Yes. And I think it gets more complicated when you start thinking about vendors you're bringing in and how they're using AI. But bring it to a little bit more of a manageable level. Uh, we can talk about the AI vendors that we use directly. So Cisco has the advantage of having an AI governance legal team that can assess these contracts for AI risk. It's something that we pretty recently built out. But anybody at the company who wants to use an AI tool, whether it's for code gen or whether it's for building a chatbot into a product, they can request using this third-party AI tool. And so the things that we look for are basically assessing what that provider is going to be doing with our data
Right.
and what type of use cases we're using here. So um, at Cisco, we want to make sure that we actually have control over all of our data. We don't want them to train their models based on our data. We don't want to lose protection of our data. So that's a big part of it. And then, of course, downstream, it's the use cases. What are we going to be doing with this? One other thing that I do want to point out also is you've got to look at who that provider is. Where was this AI tool? Where was it developed? What country was it developed in? What type of code are they using? Are they using like a really restrictive open source model? So you'll end up losing losing the information that you combine with this tool.
Yeah.
So those are the big things that we watch out for.
Okay. All right, Rob. Bit of a big question, but looking ahead 12 to 18 months with that crystal ball that we talked about earlier, what data or AI related regulatory developments should GCs have on their radar that aren't getting enough attention today, do you think?
Aha. I have a couple of notes over here that I want to just look at
Yeah.
briefly, because there are a couple of regulations that have come out recently. There's the California AB 2013, which is basically requiring developers of GAI to publicly disclose information on how they're using a customer's data. Now, that one just rolled out in January. I think that that's one that has implications in the US. Um, the other big one, and this is related to the EU AI Act, is the high-risk AI use case uh, directives that came out from the EU. They don't have a ton of guidance on these, but they expect compliance with them by this summer. So that's not even 12 months, that's 6 months. So those are two regulations that I say GC should have on their radar. But the bigger thing really is not specific regulations, but everything else that's going on in the world right now, how it's going to impact GCs and what they need to think about with their data use. I mean, going to the AI side of things, there were a lot of AI litigation cases that were working their way through the courts, and decisions are going to be coming out on those soon. And that's going to heavily influence how we have to think about AI and the risk that comes with it. In terms of data, going back to something we talked about earlier, the whole geopolitical spectrum globally right now it's in a totally different world than it was a year ago. You have the EU, who for a long time, they've always wanted to make sure their data stays within the EU. They've been wanting to protect it there. But now they're thinking about, jeepers, we don't know if we can trust countries outside of the EU to even develop our products. We're not sure we want to work with them. So they're getting even more heavily focused on making sure that data security, everything can be done within the EU. And you also have countries like KSA, Saudi Arabia, India, that are ramping up efforts to make sure that they have more control over what's being done within their country in terms of data and in terms of cloud providers. Those are the things that I would be looking at right now. You've got to look at the changes that are going on geopolitically.
Fascinating, isn't it? Well,
It's a
Rob,
busy time to be a lawyer, that's for sure.
really is. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us today. What started as a conversation about AI and data governance has turned into something much more fundamental and just fantastic. So it has been incredibly thought-provoking. Thank you for your time. And I know our listeners are going to get a huge amount out of this. So thank you for joining.
It was my pleasure, Sara. This is fantastic. Thank you.
For our listeners, I encourage you to visit Cisco's website to learn more about Cisco delivering the critical infrastructure that helps organizations thrive in the AI era. Cisco powers how people and technology work together. Visit cisco.com. That's CISCO.com. Don't forget to check the show notes for useful links to our profiles on LinkedIn, Cisco's and Axiom's websites, and other resources we discussed today. And visit axiomlaw.com for more information about Axiom and our legal, AI, tech plus talent solutions. Stay tuned to Axiom Insights for more conversations covering the technologies and trends shaping in-house legal work. I'm Sara Morgan, and I hope you have a great rest of day.